to another session of our Guide for Noahide study. My name is Abby, and with me on the screen is Andrew Overall and Jacob Sharf. And in this series of videos, we are reading and discussing this book, Guide for Noahide, written by Rabbi Michael Shlomo Baron. The book was designed to be a help for Jews and non-Jews to learn the halakhic details of the Noahide covenants, so that we can have practical guide on how to observe them in our lives. You can buy a copy online at the publisher's website, lightcatcherbooks.com, or you get the Kindle version like we have on the screen at Amazon.com. And we invite you to study with us every week as we learn our obligations under the Noahide covenant. Our plan is to keep these sessions under an hour. We encourage you to take notes, write down your questions, comments, thoughts, and feel free to post them in the comments section online, and we'll continue the discussion offline. Be sure to watch our previous episodes so you can catch up to where we are starting tonight. And tonight, our reader is going to be Andrew, and he will get us kick-started. Let me just get the page here. All right.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Abby. Okay. So, where we are continuing in part 1, section 1, Torah, that is Torah tradition and the birthright, not a religion, and continuing on page 2, on the bottom paragraph, or third paragraph down. So, continuing here. The nation of Israel are not called B'nai Noach, since they are entered into a distinct covenant with the Creator at Sinai, after Hashem delivered the nation from Egypt. Actually, this separation began gradually with Israel's forefather Abraham, who was sanctified with the additional commandment of circumcision, according to the unique role of the nation that extends from him, the role of holy priests to minister to the other nations of the world. However, before the giving of the Torah at Sinai, the Hebrews had a halachic, or legal, status of Noahides. Fittingly, the Torah's account of their lives and deeds should be understood primarily in the context of the Noahide covenant. They are a perfect case study by which we can identify the behavior Hashem desires and demands of mankind, and the behavior he rejects and forbids, that which he rewards and that for which he admonishes and punishes. So, I'd like to pause here and just make a comment. We could back up on the page there, Abby.
Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. The section here, right, says the account of the lives and deeds should be understood primarily in the context of the Noahide covenant. Okay, so even though the nation of Israel was on track by divine guidance to their own merit to become this nation to teach Torah to the world, there is still much that we can learn from them. And just as we gain wisdom from our own fathers, our ancestors, and our own wise men among the nations throughout history, Israel, who could offer us, you could say, the prime example of how to live as proper human beings, because they were faithful to the Creator, the one God.
Well, the key to keep in mind with this is that prior to the revelation of the Torah at Har Sinai, even though they had received a few extra mitzvahs, like or mitzvot, like circumcision, for example, they were primarily just obligated in the 7 laws. So anything we see them doing before the revelation at Har Sinai, basically they were acting according to the Sheva Mitzvot.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see this very clearly in a number of cases. The fact that for example, the marriages of the patriarchs would have, in most cases, been forbidden if they had been Jewish. What else? The case of Shechem, the war that they took up against Shechem is filled with different applications of Noahide law. There's a kidnapping that they deal with. There's a corrupt court system that they encounter and how they end up dealing with that. There's them actually starting a war. There's a whole bunch of different things which are all related to the 7 laws.
Well, and they is actually the siblings, right, in their family.
Right, right.
Joseph and the actual patriarchs.
Yeah.
Right,
The fathers of the 12 tribes.
in the case of Shem, okay, those who are familiar with it, and it is true that it shows in the Torah that Yaakov, or Jacob, the father, had criticized his sons, but it was not for what they did, but how they did it, with the intent with which they brought justice to Shem. As the oral law does relate, for the kind of crime that was done in Shechem, which was bride kidnapping, which, by the way, is actually a practice that continues in some parts of the world to this day, where a young man will actually kidnap a woman and then inform the young girl's father and mother that he wants to take her for a bride, and there's nothing they can do about it, and they accept it. And that's the way it is in some parts of the world. Not
But the
so.
that they were dealing with was the kidnapping, right? Not the kidnapping is what's forbidden under Noahide law. Well,
Actually, what brings about the biggest part of the situation, I think, in Shechem has nothing to do with the kidnapping necessarily. It's the corrupt court system and the fact that the people of the city failed to be witnesses to a crime that they all saw. So they failed to execute justice properly.
maybe we could get into that, delve into that a little bit more when we get to that section. That
Right.
law.
But that's the thing. If you know the details of the Sheva Mitzvot, of the 7 laws, and you go and you start looking through the Torah prior to Har Sinai, prior to Mount Sinai, it's just replete with examples like this. This is just one small story, and it has applied Noahide halacha all over it. And the whole Torah is like that.
But I will add something else. While it does, what do you say, go outside what is actual halacha, there's the other side of it, which is mentioned later on in God for the Noahide, and that is.
But hold on, what goes outside halacha? What, I don't understand.
Oh, the example I was about to bring up with Abraham, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. When he went to run to serve his guest, if you recall, in Genesis, when Abraham, it says that he was sitting outside his tent in the heat of the day, and when soldiers had come, he ran to serve them. Now, the lesson that's being taught there is one of hospitality and chesed, what is called chesed, of kindness. And not only doing that, but noting that he ran to do this good deed. Now, well, without veering off too far, you might wonder, okay, it doesn't seem like any great trial, but as oral tradition relates, he himself was healing from his circumcision. But even then, even in that pain and recovering in the heat, he saw wayfarers, okay, this is going across the desert, and he ran to serve them, in absolute contradistinction to the neighboring peoples of that day, the Canaanites, specifically the Sodomites, who were known for doing the opposite.
So you're saying that even things which are not necessarily like strict halacha in the Torah, there's cases where it's like these are wise practices that it brings forth.
That is right.
It shows us that.
Actually, you could say that perhaps, without taking too much time, but again, wanting to give an example here of seeing the lives of proto-Israelites in the context of our same Noahide covenant, right? You can say the story is not complete without knowing the place where Abraham lived near Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, which really was known for oppressing the poor and wayfarers. As oral tradition relates, they not only did not give charity, but they would punish anyone who did so or try to give safe haven to those who were journeying from afar, which was a lot more dangerous in those days anyway, and those who were poor, without food, without money. They go to the point of murdering them, or in the case of Lot, they were actually going to rape them. And as
Right. Let's not get too in depth in any of these examples. Yeah. We don't need to go over the whole story.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
The Torah is filled with these sorts of things.
Yeah, I think the point is that the history of Israel did not start at Sinai. It actually started with Adam. It started with Adam, continued through Noah, through Abraham, and then to Sinai. Is up until then they were just under the same covenant that we're trying to rediscover in this age. And they're the only ones that has preserved it up until now. And because of that, I think, and we kind of talked about this in the first episode, the role that they have as priests and we have as lay nations. So how does that fit with, so we have the Noahide covenant. Is the Jewish covenant inside of the Noahide covenant? Is it considered separate? Is it, because they're still obligated to 7 laws in addition to what was given at Sinai.
It's essentially, if you study the sources, especially you can see this in the Mishnah Torah, in the Laws of Kings and Their Wars, chapter 9. If you read at the beginning, you can see how it basically was built on top of the 7 laws.
Okay.
So you have sort of a continuing revelation that began with Adam, and he received 6 miswot. And then Noah came along and received the 7th. And then Avraham came along and received an 8th for just his children. And then it builds upon this until you get to the revelation at Har Sinai, where God basically recommands everything and sets it unchangeably and says, this is the way it now is permanently going forward.
So at Sinai, even Moshe was a Noahide up until he was under the 7 laws up until that point.
That is correct.
Okay.
Which is actually an interesting thing to point out, that the king of the prophets, the greatest prophet ever to have lived, up until the moment that he received his greatest prophecy, was basically a Noahide. So,
Or as Maury likes to say, a super Noahide, because they had from Abraham until that point they had additional covenants besides the 7.
yeah, they had a few additional commandments, but
super with no capes.
yeah, I don't think he calls them super Noahides. I think it's Goy Kadosh is the word he uses. They were Israel in potentia.
In potentia.
Okay. So,
Do we carry on?
else? Shall we continue?
Please.
Okay. Continuing on, reading. We now see that, unlike Israel's covenant at Sinai, the Noahide covenant is not a religion that one must convert to. The people one must be accepted into. It is the divinely ordained legal, social, moral, and spiritual framework that non-Jewish human beings are born into, just as we are all born into a natural framework of physical laws and limitations. That fits in with the Torah tradition that 6 of the 7 laws were already given to Adam in the Garden of Eden. After the deluge, Hashem renewed the covenant and expanded it to include the new prohibition of meat taken from a living animal. Beyond the legal definition, it is a birthright, free gifts to anyone born into this world as the basic moral foundation for a life in harmony with the Creator and the people.
I think this is a key thing that makes this hard for a lot of people to grasp. I think when you become when you want to embrace Christianity, you become a Christian, right? You go through a process and you become a Christian. If you want to embrace Islam, you go through a process and you become a Muslim. When you want to embrace Torah and Judaism, you don't need to become anything. You're just you. You were you before, you're you now. Nothing has changed. You're not anything different. You're just a human being who is now doing what is correct. That's the only difference.
Well, I think there is one slight difference. So, going back to the Christianity thing, even when you're born to Christian parents, you still have to go through a rite of entry, like baptism and all that stuff.
That's true.
The Noahide covenant, since you're already born into it, when you come back to it, all you're doing is you're basically like a Noahide Baal Tshuva.
Well, you already went through your rite of passage. You were
Right. You're just returning. You don't have to convert. There's no rite of passage except being born. So it's like when Jews who are secular or non-observant become observant, which is what about Teshuvah is they're returning to their path and they're becoming observant in their laws. That's what we're trying to do, is become observant in our Noahide laws.
Yes, exactly.
We have to remind ourselves of this truth. And it goes back to Genesis. What does it say when God created humanity? It's created, as it says in Hebrew, Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, which really teaches that God had created humanity above all his other creations with the ability to choose freely, to distinguish between right and wrong, what is true and what is false, and to connect with the Creator, even through prophetic knowledge, as evidenced with the way Adam and his wife Hawa, or Eve, related to their Creator, long before the giving of the Torah at Sinai. And it is something truly to meditate on, that we're all created with a godly potential, even where we stand right now. In that way, why add on any extra ritual to say, well, if you don't do this, you are not a godly person? I mean, what could be more godly than living a just life, as we'll learn from obeying these laws, and especially doing so with awareness of the Creator?
Yeah, basically following these laws are the key to bringing out our godly potential, to live, or to not necessarily bringing out, but rather to living up to our potential as human beings.
In
The
life
best
of
that we're capable of becoming. What's that?
A life of harmony, it says.
Yeah.
Right. That's fine.
Yeah, they teach us, yeah, that's true. There's basically two major aspects. So they teach us to live, they teach us how to perfect our relationships with God and with our fellow man. And you might also say with the world, with God's creation.
And it makes sense, because if you want to be on good terms with people, you don't kill them and you don't steal their stuff, and you take care of their stuff, and when you find their stuff, you return it. All this is covered in the halakha. You know, it's the same thing too with God. You don't insult God. You don't, go cheat on God by being idolatrous, and you don't, you're careful with creation, with this what He gives you to eat. So here's a thing that that a lot of people, that struggle with, is that, okay, it says here 6 laws were given to Adam in the garden, and the 7th was given to Noah. But 6 laws, there's nowhere until you get to Sinai or with the 10 Commandments, there's nowhere in Genesis with Adam that says, do not murder, do not steal, do not. So where does this list come from? Like, where does this teaching that 6 was given to Adam and 7 to Noah, where's that either in the Torah or in the oral tradition?
I would say hold that thought and let's read the next section. And then when we stop, let's discuss that. Since we haven't even gone through the list yet.
Okay.
But we're just about to.
But good question, all the
Yes.
same.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, what are the laws? The Noahide covenant is made of 7 fundamental commandments, which are generally viewed as 7 categories of law, containing other laws within them, and other laws that accompany them. The 7 general commandments, mainly prohibitions, appear in the Talmudic literature under the following titles. So did we mention, did we read them in Hebrew?
I read them in Hebrew and then also in English.
Of course.
I would read them in English first, and well, either way.
First. So the first one, idolatry, Hebrew is known as avodah zarah, which literally means a foreign or strange service. Which we'll get to more when we get to that chapter. Cursing a name of God, also known as birkat Hashem, which literally means blessing the name. I wonder why that sounds the opposite. It's out of reverence for the divine, not to put the Hebrew word cursing next to Hashem. So out of rabbinic parlance, they said birkat. But with the understanding, this refers to the prohibition of cursing the name of God. Next, murder, or shvichut damim, shedding of blood. And then forbidden sexual relations, or gilui arayot, which means reviewing nakedness. And something that is also learned along the way, both in Torah literature and rabbinic literature, the figures of speech, often at times for the sake of modesty, right? Sometimes it's explicit and sometimes they use more modest speech. Moving on. Theft, the Hebrew word for that is gazal. And eating meat taken from a living animal, also known in Hebrew as ever min hachai, or limb from a living animal. And then finally, justice, or in Hebrew, din. And that is the one positive, the obligation to enforce all of these other laws.
So these are the 7.
Mm-hmm.
And
What's on the next page? Or does it cut to a new paragraph then?
let me see here. And mine, it cuts to a new paragraph. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
So Abby, what was your question again?
About what?
About the 7 laws.
Oh, I'm just gonna talk about that it's 7 categories, and so I know in some places they say that there's discrepancies in the number, like there's 6 or something, or sometimes 70. There are all kinds of different numbers. So how did the standard of 7 come to be? And yeah.
There are different listings given. Generally, the 7 are the commonly understood main categories. But the important thing to understand is that these categories are not to be understood as like strict, hard and fast. These are the categories and all must fit inside of these buckets. Rather, these are Hashem did not, as I was taught basically, Hashem did not command us 7 specific miswot. Rather, these are a mnemonic device or an aid to memory that was created by the sages to order and understand the entirety of all of the concepts that fall into what we know as the Shiva Mitzvot, the halakha that Hashem has commanded to non-Jews.
To add to this, and this is partly to answer Abby's question from before of the sources, that Hashem, and just to be clear, because Jacob's not saying, what? The rabbis made it up? No, that's not what he said at all. Again, what he said is that making the categories was, like, as he said, a mnemonic device, because 7 is a significant number in Torah for a lot of reasons. And usually the trait that brings to mind, of course, is completion. Okay, like 7 days in a week. Okay. Yes. Now, the source for this, Hashem did command Adam through prophetic knowledge. And the source for this is actually found in Genesis when Hashem and then speaks to Adam regarding, everything in the garden, what he's permitted to eat and what he's forbidden to eat from, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But the way that the lashon, okay, the lingo is spoken in there, the categories are hinted at or are implicit in that particular verse in Genesis.
Well, this is true of all of the 7. The details of them and this information can be extracted from the text of the Torah, basically, in numerous different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But
there's something else to keep in mind too, and this should be of benefit for some who already know, they know, and for those who are new, or you could say returning to this path, the path of relating to God in a very simple, humble way, that the tradition of Torah learning, that is learning the ways of God, remember that this existed in oral form before it was given over in written form at Mount Sinai. So it's understandable where people would say, well, we need to have our morality, okay, anchored in the Bible or in the Torah. And it's true. It is ultimately the source for this. Okay. However, again, like with these laws, okay, they were given before the Torah was given, and how can I say, as Rambam himself pointed out in Mishnah Torah, and as we will see, that these are laws that can be understood rationally. In other words, it does not require divine revelation to understand the necessity and the rationality of all these laws. Now, to some degree, it is like a matter of common sense. However, precision is absolutely necessary, and that's where the tradition of learning comes in. That really goes all the way back to Adam, back down through Moshe. Okay.
I think I remember Jacob pointed this out to me one time, which is that in the ideal world where we all know all of the details of the 7 laws, when we read the Torah and the stories in the Torah, they would just jump out at us. So imagine imagine a time where the story of Adam and Abraham and the children of Israel before Sinai, where people will be like, oh yeah, it's talking about that, and oh yeah, it's talking about kidnapping, and so Bezrat Hashem, that maybe in my lifetime, I hope that the knowledge of the 7 laws would be so ubiquitous that we won't be like, well, why isn't it in the Torah? We'll be like, of course it's not, because it's obvious.
Or it won't be, of course it's not. We'll be, well, it is in the Torah. It's right there. It's all over the Torah.
All over, because we know exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah, and as we go through each of the 7 in this book, we'll see where some of these come from in the Torah, and we'll help point a lot of that out.
Mm-hmm. And finally, before moving on, I mentioned the verse in Torah, okay, not to leave people hanging here. The verse specifically, where I'm not mentioning this as the ultimate primary source, but this is one of the main sources.
Well, I don't know if I would get into that. It requires so much elucidation, it's just going to confuse people.
Well, here's the thing. I was only going
Unless
to
we sit here and elucidate it for like 15, 20 minutes.
Well, that's not the point. I'm not going to elucidate it, but give a verse.
I know, and that's the thing. If you don't, you're going to confuse people.
Well, I think he should give the verse, and we could always talk about it offline because he did mention the verse. I think he should cite it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to go into a long discussion, but I think it's good to cite it. I'm with Andy on that.
It's just people are going to look at that and read it in English and go, that doesn't say anything. What are you talking about? So just keep that in mind.
Well,
It's something you can't elucidate from the English of it. You have to know, you have to look at the Hebrew and tear it apart in a very specific way and understand it. So.
and perhaps it could come for another time.
What?
Yeah.
No, go ahead and bring it forth. I was just warning people who are listening.
Right.
About it.
Okay. It's in Genesis in chapter 2 in verse 16 in English, okay, in our translation, it would say, and Hashem God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it. Now, again, for those used to English, okay, we're used to reading things in, as Amari would say, in a very plain Greek style. But certainly in the beginning accounts of Genesis, in Bereshit, the way that is written in Hebrew is a lot clearer, and itself, the text, when you learn it from the Jewish perspective, it is a lot more dense and a lot deeper than what we learned in Sunday school, put it that way. And when you learn from a Torah scholar, you definitely come to appreciate it.
It is true.
Yes.
Okay, shall we continue on in the book?
Yes. Okay.
Maybe we get through the end right here.
The end
Okay.
of this section. Yeah.
So the simplicity of this covenant is striking. It includes no religious ceremonies, requires no sacrificial service, no priestly hierarchy, equality between men and women, equality of all races and colors, vision, what a world. It is the most basic code of human behavior that allows for a world united under the one and only King of the universe. Then it is forbidden, according to Torah, for non-Jews to create any man-made religions. Why add to the simple perfection of Hashem's covenant? You shall not, as it says in Deuteronomy, you shall not add and you shall not subtract from it. In Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1. Just as with the rest of the Torah, adding it is subtracting. The suffering and death in the name of man-made religions should be enough of a proof to the wisdom of this prohibition. And I will say this, now moving off the text and just adding a comment here, that is certainly the challenge for mankind, and that is simply to relate to the Creator without imposing our own imaginations of what would be most pleasing, and that is, if I may say, using the religious impulse in the wrong direction. Okay, again, speaking to the prohibition of creating rites in religion, two things that I may offer. I know that we're short on time. Let's see how well I can do this. Okay. Now, as we're reading this week, last week in the Torah portion in Leviticus was
By the time this airs, this will be quite some time ago, not last week.
Sorry, it didn't happen last week, but there was in the Jewish weekly reading of the Torah portion as they go throughout the year, it came on Leviticus, and that is the sons of Aaron the high priest, Nadav and Abihu, when they brought in what was called Esh Zara, or a strange substance, when they wanted to bring an offering to Hashem, and they were struck down for it. Now, that should really give us pause. Why? Did they not want to do something good? Well, the reason was given later, because these men who were priests, who had to set an example for the nation and also for the world, that they made an offering that Hashem did not command. They had no intention to worship an idol, but they wanted to create an extra rite. Hashem in his wisdom decreed only what he decreed in terms of religious service, that you must do this thing in that way at that time and so forth. No need to add to it. When they did, and they knew better, then they were judged for that deed. And that is one example.
Very harshly.
Yes. The second example is related by way of the oral tradition. And we will get into this more later when we get into the laws of idolatry. But it must be known that idolatry, that is the worship of images, both physical and even abstract, okay, came into the world because of the invention of religious rites, but specifically for objects or things other than the Creator. It was the grandson of Adam. You recall the lineage. There was Adam, his son was Seth, and then his son was Enosh. The oral tradition relates that in that time, these were men of great wisdom, but they made a great mistake in thinking that it is proper to give service and honor to the celestial bodies of the heavens. Why? Because they are part of the king's creations. Just as they thought, okay, just as you give honor to a king's servants, let's give honor to them. This is forbidden. This was known even from the beginning. But from that time that they started to give service to these objects as well as the Creator, then they began to create more false rites. Okay? And this is actually hinted at also in Genesis, in chapter 4, it says that in those days, to call upon the name of Hashem became profaned. The hint being that they were calling on the names of other gods, other deities who don't exist because they're not the Creator. They're either creations or imaginations that came from these men's hearts. So going back here, okay, and that is the simplicity of following the path of the just, as we will learn from the examples of the righteous men and women of ancient times.
I think this is something that a lot of people, especially coming out of a devoutly religious background, struggle with, is to how to strip away religious rite and not, I guess, kind of replace it with something else, whether it's in the Torah or not. And I think it's just something people struggle with. So I'm not sure how this will play out in a lot of people's minds, because people don't see the 7 laws as something that connects them to God for whatever reason.
Here's the thing. The 7 laws themselves are very simple. They're a basic framework of morality that's designed to be able to fit into the culture and the I guess the existing expression of any given people, you know? So if you're like, if you're a very primitive tribe living in, caves hunting for your food, or if you're a people, like a very high-tech people living in a city with technology and all this other stuff, the 7 laws can fit into your life without requiring you to become Jewish, basically, without requiring you to give up your culture and your ethnicity and who you are and how you live. Unless, of course, murder or theft is a core part of how you live. But
In which case,
they're
that's bad.
designed in order to be very ubiquitous, right? So that anyone can do them. Within that, they provide us a tremendous amount of freedom. So while they don't contain like specific religious ceremonies that we're obligated to do, and they don't contain, you know, specific ways that we have to do these ritual things, we are free to express ourselves and to pray to God in whatever way touches our hearts, and to, you know, do things like this as long as we don't add to the Torah. Meaning, as long as we don't take these things and say, okay, for myself, I like to pray this way to God, and I like to sing songs to him. That's fine. But if I take those things and I say, therefore everyone else should do it this way too, because that is the way that God desires it, I've crossed a line. I have now added to God's Torah, and that's
you cross the line even when you make it. And it's one thing to do it freely and as an expression, but it's a different thing to say, I am now obligating myself to do something God does not obligate me to.
Yeah, that too. If I take those things and I say, this is the way that I like to serve Hashem right now, and therefore this is incumbent upon me and I must always do it this way, then yeah, I've also crossed that line and I've added to God's Torah.
A lot of people have Noahide guilt about that stuff. It's almost like Catholic guilt, I hear.
Right.
But I think too, it's I think the way it's set up, it, like you said, it crosses different cultures and different traditions. And the way I see it, and Rabbi Rowan brought this up in one of his classes, that we use the 7 laws to elevate our existing peoples and our existing traditions and our existing cultures, and to use the 7 laws to strip away the stuff that God doesn't desire and keep the stuff like charity is not incumbent upon us. But if we live in a society that's charitable, that's great.
Yeah. And that's part of the beauty of the 7 laws too. That what you brought forth there is that we are not supposed to throw away our cultures like garbage. You know, the people that we come from, the cultures that we've developed over thousands of years are beautiful and contain many, many wonderful things. Even though there's like lots of garbage and idolatry and all this other stuff mixed into them, the 7 laws help us sift that out and bring forth the beauty that we possess as unique nations apart from Israel. You know, we don't have to become Jews. We don't have to become Israel to be unique and beautiful people. We already are that.
I know.
And the 7 laws help us bring that out. That's our job as non-Jews, as Noahides, is to
imagine if we all had to eat kugel forever. I don't like kugel.
As delicious as kugel is, yes. I also like lasagna.
I like curry. And I like the music of my peoples.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's one of the hidden beauties of these 7 laws, is that it's for everybody in their time and in their place and in their people. And imagine the diversity of, it's kind of, you can see a microcosm of it among the Jewish people. They all observe 613 commandments, and yet you have Ashkenazi tradition, you have the Sephardi tradition, you have the Mizrahi tradition. I mean, with 613, we still have all that diversity. Imagine what we could have with 7.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we already have with 7. We just have to clean up our act.
I mean, what the Creator desires is diversity. And how do we know that? Because He created in the beginning from Noah and his sons, not 1 nation, but 70 from the beginning. With that kind of diversity, which parallels a saying among the sages that there are 70 faces to the Torah. In other words, there are many different ways to interpret it without contradicting one another, okay, lest we go off into this super liberal way of saying, well, you can have a diversity of opinions that contradict one another. It doesn't matter. See, again, going back to what I referenced before in Genesis in chapter 2, the way the verse reads in English at least, and probably other languages, it reads plainly. However, in the original Hebrew, and with the explanations and the oral Torah that accompany this, there's a great deal of depth to be learned from this. Certainly, even where we are, even if we don't know Hebrew. Okay, but going back to the whole aim of diversity here, and what I said in the beginning, and I thought about it again and thinking that came up perhaps too harsh or maybe too rigid. The point is, as Jacob explained, is to bring out, I would say, like a nascent holiness that I think exists all throughout creation. But it's up to us to bring that out. Two sides of the same coin, I think, whether they're bringing out potential or living up to it. But the point is that
I don't know that I would say a nascent holiness, more like a nascent goodness might be more appropriate.
yes, 70 pages to the Torah. So,
So with that, maybe we should kind of end here, and we'll start learning. We'll continue to learn more about what we are supposed to be obligated to do as Noahides, so we can achieve this beautiful vision for our people, whoever our people are, and in our cultures and in our societies. Because I would like to see that in my lifetime, where you don't have to stop people and be like, that's stealing, and you shouldn't steal, and you know, stealing's my pet law. I like that a lot. Well, I mean, just study it. You know how people specialize in different, they specialize in Shabbat or whatever. I want to specialize in theft and the laws of theft. That's
Cool.
that's me. But anyway,
They're very
important. Before Hashem gave the laws of the holy tabernacle to the holy service, before that, he gave the laws of justice. How can we come before Hashem? How can we come before the Creator if we are doing wrong? If we're doing wrong to others, cheating and stealing and doing even worse. And anyone who's well versed in the prophets, it was something for which Israel was criticized. Again, there I go on my harsh track again.
yeah, you can't cheat and steal and say, oh, I pray every day and therefore I'm a good person. It doesn't work that way. You can pray all day if you want, but if you steal and cheat, it's not
Right.
how it
And such laws are more intricate than one would realize, but these are the means by which a society can be peaceful or otherwise, God forbid.
Great. Any last words? Was that our last words? All right. Well, in that case, that ends our study time this time. Thank you for joining us in this session of Guide for Noahide Study. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section. We'll take the discussion offline, kind of respond there. And we hope to see you again next time.
Good. Good week, everyone. May Hashem bring you success in all your endeavors.
Oh man.